good evening and morning alike, or simply a global warm welcome to all of you. This is our first community design chat here on Instagram's live stream, and my name is Julika. I'm located in Amsterdam, just as our today's guest will be. Hello. And I have the honor to host this chat for the Design Lab of the University of California in San Diego. Many people are tuning in, and this is wonderful. So welcome. I've been building for and with the Design Lab community since about 2015, and I'm continue to do this remotely as a designer in residence. And these chats that I envisioned are collaborative and community driven. Simply put together, we're doing this more than for you. And feel free to ask your questions below in the comment sections. So as you're joining, type them in, and I will read them out to our guest in about just a minute. And today's guest is Alice Haugh, Strategic Design Lead at Space&Matter here in Amsterdam, and she'll be joining us momentarily. It is all a little bit improvisational, which is why I like this forum so much. So let's flow with it. You are also in Amsterdam, but how about you just introduce yourself, and then I'll say a little bit about the topic that we'll be covering today.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Yeah, indeed. So I'm Alice Haugh. I'm Strategic Design Lead at Space&Matter. Space&Matter, we are a 12-year-old company, and we focus on spatial and strategic design in the built environment, mainly actually focusing on transitioning cities towards a circular economy. And what that means for us is that we design both the kind of spaces, so neighborhoods, buildings, interiors, public spaces, in which people and also nature can thrive together. But we also, and importantly for me, we focus on the sort of institutional dark matter that enables that circular economy to really come to fruition. So we have these two sides of the company, that's the space and the matter, and I'm leading the matter, which means that I have my head busy with all kinds of financial models, organizational structures, ownership models, regulations, and really trying to apply design to that sort of space and trying to experiment with that, coming up with new models, collaborating with organizations who we need to join with to kind of make this transition, and then work with the space on the architecture side to also implement in neighborhoods and in buildings. So this is a bit my place today.
This is wonderful. So in the lead, you hold a lot of topics, and as you're introducing, you hold topics and roles and complexity in it. Let's look at it or break it a little bit down for this to also be an introductory chat, or for someone who chimes in and is curious what this means. Cooperative ownership for ecologically sound cities. What in a way does that mean? What can you tell me about that topic?
Yeah, quite a mouthful. So for us, I think what we see is that when we work directly with communities, the sustainability ambition is much higher. So we prefer to work with the community as a client, let's say, and in two of our projects in Amsterdam North, which are the Ceuvel and Het Schoonship. These are two kind of prototype circular neighborhoods which were developed with local communities, one where they wanted to live there and one where they wanted affordable workspace. And the design brief from them was such that the ambitions and the sustainability were much higher than where we see with kind of traditional real estate development projects. And so what we really focus on is sort of scaling up that citizen sector and providing where we can design work, but also looking at kind of other tools and methodologies for supporting citizen groups to invest in their own projects. So for instance, we've just launched a new platform called Crowd Building. It's actually live now, and this supports individuals to kind of find like-minded pioneers who also want to build projects together. So it's also about co-living and kind of coming together into forming project groups And so what we hope is that this platform will enable that movement to really scale beyond what we're able to work on ourselves. So we want to bring people together who kind of want to develop housing or other projects around concepts and also around sites to really kind of help to scale that sector. So this is the sort of framing that I often, that we often work with, is kind of directly with communities.
Mm-hmm. So you, to just step a few steps back, your background is in architecture, and you really speak the language well. My background is in psychology, so I sometimes have to slow myself or understand them from a different discipline, also as someone who's worked in design thinking myself. So you give examples in Amsterdam of Het Schoonship. That is a typical Dutch word, and the Ceuvel.
Much better pronunciation than me, yeah.
Those are foreign terms.
Very good.
So anyone who's not from the Netherlands or new to the Dutch language, we can type this later in the comments section or in the description. So to look them up, or they're on the website of the Space&Matter. But they're actually indeed two amazing examples. One is a floating neighborhood on the water, and the other one is boats taken to land. So they're kind of complementary, and they're done indeed cooperatively to the people living there. So and then you give the third example of this platform. So really creating an environment where a citizen can weigh in instead of just finding singularly a house, applying for it and moving into a single house. It's really about more of an aggregated neighborhood and community.
Exactly, yeah.
Tell me a little bit more about what sort of impact that also creates in your role. So you're describing these past projects, you're describing this platform, and you're describing that you're working almost more in the dark sphere of this. So what is there the impact of on the city, on sustainability, on environment?
Yeah, well, I think what we are interested to do is actually, what I'm working on now is shifting a bit the conversation about how we relate to time in our projects as well. So one really interesting feature of the Ceuvel is that the land was extremely polluted. So it was a site that had heavy industry on it before. And it wasn't expected that much could be done with that site because it was so toxic, actually. And the process which is still ongoing now is the kind of regeneration of the land through phytoremediation, which is very slow cleaning and transformation of soil through using plants. And this is a process which is ongoing probably now for about the 8th year and still is not complete. And I think an important part of the circular economy and something that I have kind of really on my mind at the moment is this relationship with time and with the future, actually. So often sort of real estate developments are planned with this idea of planned obsolescence in mind, right? So it's the same with a washing machine, with a toothbrush, with an iPhone. It's gonna break at some point, and you kind of expect that of these products. Well, it's the same with buildings. I've been doing some research, and the average lifespan of a building in Europe is just 42 years, which is really shocking because the materials then take it apart and it turns into waste. So what's interesting when we take a kind of circular approach is how we expand out this idea of time and the kind of longevity of materials. And it's not just a technocratic venture, but it's also the kind of social relationship that people have to that site, to that project, that they take on the role of a kind of steward and are able to maintain, to take care. And we see again in our projects that when the community is involved in that process, then there is much more care which goes into the neighborhood or the building. So a project that I'm working on right now, which is really taking that idea of time and kind of thinking into the future to its extreme, is with a community land trust in the south of Amsterdam in an area called the Belma. And this is the first community land trust in the Netherlands, but actually I know that the model is quite well developed already in the US, and it would be really interesting actually to kind of swap experiences on that. But the idea of the community land trust is that a community buys a piece of land and actually takes the kind of ownership and the maintenance over for that piece of land for perpetuity. So it's almost taking land out of kind of market speculation and enabling it to be in community use forever. And that's a really interesting match with a circular economy, because you have this really long-term perspective. You're thinking about how to plan not only for today, but for our grandchildren's time and their grandchildren. So it allows us to sort of stretch out the idea of design, actually. And so we're pushing ourselves to come up with or to imagine what a neighborhood for 7 generations could look like. So thinking really like 150 years down the line, how could this neighborhood be regenerating itself? How does this community land trust play a role there? And how do we sort of move away from this planned obsolescence, this kind of take, make, dispose? So I think that's currently what I have in my mind, and it's a really interesting study, I have to say.
That sounds like a good point to mention, the impact that you want to have 7 generations down the road, and also to step back. Anyone who's joining us here, this is a half-hour conversation between 2 people in Amsterdam, but virtually streamed, so really anyone can listen to it, but also hosted from a San Diego, Californian account. And we're speaking in that way to a global audience. And you're mentioning the average lifespan for building in Europe, which is 42 years. I don't know what that is for the US, but I have lived there for 10 years. It felt much slower, smaller, and because there's not so much brick building, it was a lot more wood and carpentry, especially in San Diego or in Southern California where I've lived. And you said that the land trusts are more common over there. So anyone in the community who watches this, this would be a great resource or point to connect on. So you hold the goal high of impact for 7 generations. What are obstacles in such multi-stakeholder, multi-level, multi-stage work? What are obstacles or pain points you've crossed in your position?
Yeah, I think generally the kind of traditional real estate model is probably the biggest block, both because it's 2 sides. It sees community engagement almost as a risk, a risk that communities might have too many opinions, might sort of push the process out of its kind of trajectory, might delay things, that kind of not in my backyard NIMBYism that's possible to come up. But what we believe is that really actually connecting to the community is the way to de-risk the project, because then you know exactly what a community wants or needs. And so you almost have a guaranteed group of people who will live or work in that project at the end. So this is also what crowd building can facilitate, actually, is almost like a direct kind of market study where you actually connect to people and find out what they need before you start to build. So those kind of traditional real estate processes, I would say, are a roadblock for that reason, and also because of this short-termism that we see time and time again. As I mentioned, the kind of 42-year figure, which really blew my mind, and just this idea that property is a kind of asset to be invested in and to be profited from, rather than to create great cities. So I think these 2 are the sort of points that we're trying to tackle in our projects, and work collaboratively with different types of partners who have other angles on that. So community land trust is a really interesting example, but we also work very directly with municipalities who also have a longer term perspective, right? Because they have to take care of their citizens. Luckily in Amsterdam, the municipality owns a lot of the land, which is also really great compared to, I mean, I'm from England, so compared to this context, and I think also the American context, it really helped to have that kind of public ownership in place for taking some of these long-term decisions.
So what's something that you aim for, which is community engagement, is for you kind of an opportunity, for others is kind of a complication, or sometimes seen as an obstacle. And so we're really talking also about different perspectives. Is it an obstacle for one or an obstacle for the other? So that's good. That's really interesting in terms of a theory of mind. Whose voice are we talking from? the design lab at the University of California in San Diego is in a university, public university, a knowledge institute. So what kind of support do you hope for or would be ideal to receive from such knowledge institutes? And you are also in Amsterdam. There's even interdisciplinary multi-site institutes like the Advanced AMS Institute, the Advanced Metropolitan Solutions Institute here. That's quite unique in bringing together Dutch universities plus MIT. Yeah, but what would be a dream come true support from such a university or any university?
Yeah, I think this it's a bit of a technical term, but we say kind of quadruple helix, right?
Yeah.
Where you have the citizen sector, the public sector, academia, and then companies like us working together. And I think that's a very unique mix in Amsterdam. And indeed, these different sectors work very closely together. I'm not sure why that is, whether it's because it's kind of a small city and we're all more or less on top of each other, or there's a lot of trust between these different parts of the economy, let's say.
It's just a bike ride or train ride away, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Everything is very close. So in the project with the Community Land Trust, for example, we're actually working with a number of students from AMS Institute who are doing a master's on the relationship between circular economy and new ownership models. So they help us with interviews, with in-depth research, like reading into sort of a lot of kind of background information that they also trigger us with and ask us difficult questions, which is really nice. And we also work very closely with Amsterdam municipality in that work, and they really have that model kind of on their agenda as well, which helps a lot. And I would be very curious in California and in San Diego how that kind of quadruple helix is working. And of course, it seems like there's many overlaps in terms of themes and concerns between what we're doing and what the design lab is doing. And actually in 2 weeks' time, myself and some collaborating organizations are doing a kind of Dutch California week of conversations about the circular economy and cities. So it would be really great to be able to connect to your network over there. And if there are people who are interested, they can reach out to me and I can share some of the events information. Many of them are public, and we would really like to explore how we can learn from each other. Actually, in a way, we have totally different contexts in terms of density, urban form, weather, but in a way we also have many similarities, and the focus in California on sustainability and the objectives that have been set. I mean, some are even more ambitious than we have here in the Netherlands, actually. So it seems like there's a really big energy in the shift towards decarbonizing the energy network, for example, and really kind of shifting California from being dependent on fossil fuels to being free of them. So these kind of themes we would love to work on together. And yeah, please do reach out if there's anyone watching or listening who's working on those things.
Yeah, thank you for, or what a coincidence that this is in 2 weeks time. And also, to be fair to the Californians, they are at the beginning of their day, maybe especially with more home office these days, it takes a little bit longer to get to the screen or to these online events. But this is watchable later and also shareable later. So anyone who's watching this knows of someone, this can be shared later and the conversation can continue offline. We still have 10 minutes, and I'm really glad that we kind of are able to get to such a complex topic in a half hour. So it's a short amount of time, but also good enough of time to really get to the introduction of some of these topics. Yeah, as I'm speaking to you, the new director was just commenced at the design lab. So it was Donald Norman for the years since founding, and now it's someone with a background in urban planning. It's Dr. Nguyen. So that's something on the website to find as well. So really exciting, very fitting with the theme. Can you tell me a little bit about you as Alice, as a person? What about this topic of a sustainable future, of sustainably built structures is so connected to you? your motivation, or to what drives you, or really motivates you, and then making a difference here.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I started out my career as an architect. So I trained in London and then in Copenhagen, and I worked as an architect and an urban designer in London for several years. And I guess I got quite frustrated with receiving briefs from clients that I thought, oh, I can do better. Like that's not the right solution to what that city or that community needs. But when you're on the kind of receiving end of those briefs, when you're in that consultant mode, it's hard to work with them sometimes. So I forced myself to sort of switch over to the client side. I worked on the London Olympic Park after it was a sort of arena for the games in 2012, and when it was being transitioned into a series of new neighborhoods. So there the question were, how do we integrate this kind of strange field of stadia with pre-existing communities? What can they bring, and what do they need? Who's going to pay for all of this? Kind of what are those financial flows? I think also how to sort of make the process democratic and engaging when it's such a huge new piece of infrastructure and project. And I got just more and more convinced that there must be new ways of doing these processes, right? And that having a design background myself, I had something to offer in that space. So I set up a think tank with 3 friends called In Between Economies. And we hosted events and conducted research into some of these big kind of wicked challenges that cities see today, like how technology is changing the way we relate to cities, the urban-rural divide, and these kind of questions of populism rising up, affordable housing and how to provide that, and really just bringing these questions to the foreground and convening partners or collaborators from strange, different domains to just fuse together and discuss them and try to find new solutions. And this weirdly then brought me to the Netherlands, where I moved 3.5 years ago to work as a futurist, focusing on cities. So focusing on questions like the future of work, the future of sex work. Actually, we did a project with the red light district, which was typically Dutch. Future of mobility. And this really convinced me also of the need to think longer term and to do it in a structured way. I think there's somehow we're in this kind of crisis of imagination at a public level, that we cannot really imagine a different way of living, right? That's very difficult. We kind of know that we're faced with climate change, and we're now faced with other crises like the pandemic, but most people find it quite difficult to kind of switch on this longer term imagination mode and really release themselves from kind of the world and the environment that we're in. So I started to explore more of these future scenario planning methodologies, and really how to open those up to a wider audience. So hosting big workshops and inviting people to participate and to really imagine the future together. And I think the key topic here is often climate change. So now I focus a lot on kind of imagining alternatives to that. And with Space and Matter, what we're also able to do is visualize these futures, right? So we can draw them, we can describe them, we can make workshops around them, and using those sort of design capabilities, I think also opens the conversation up, because at some point things can get too academic or too abstract. What does it mean to have a mobility system in 2050? It's quite difficult for most people, but if you break it down and make it fun, actually make it engaging, then it becomes more inclusive, I think. So kind of mixing those design thinking methodologies with architecture and with spatial thinking to come up with new visions for the future. That's where I've kind of come from.
And it sounds like a very sound narrative, one that I can follow, and I get really inspired with every bit of it. So I'm just kind of summarizing it a bit. So with architecture and design, there is this capacity to visualize, to make it tangible with a sketch and a drawing, make it very, very visible. Something that I'm experimenting with as a psychologist by really borrowing and stealing from design and be like, wow, like futurism has a lot of hacks and beautiful ways of drawing the future, which is really, yeah, escapes so easily our fantasy, especially in this crisis mode. Maybe, and I don't see questions in the community, but I hope there will be at least one. So anyone who has a question for Alice, especially in the last 4 minutes, this would be wonderful. You talked about frustration moving you forward, and also moving into different, literally in different cities. What is the mindset that helps you to stay out of this crisis mode and to really be free and relaxed enough to think so far forward? Because I can very much relate to this crisis mode, and especially in the last year, where it was just like, oof, how do I do today? How do I do next week? How do we go about this until the next press release? This is really something that I think was a collective experience in the last year. So yeah, I'm throwing this at you here. What is a little bit on the mindset to really get that calm, to think into a longer future?
Yeah, no, I think you hit the nail on the head, and it's important to say that the possibility to think long term is often the field or the arena of quite sort of privileged people, right? So I think it's important to admit that as well, and that many, perhaps most in the population, are thinking more short term because that's a kind of necessity, actually. And one of the key things that we need to do is really create the conditions in cities and in societies to free people up to be able to imagine. So this is kind of number one thing to work on, I think, and we do that in the ways that we can, working with cities, municipalities, and at the neighborhood level directly with communities to kind of facilitate these processes. But I must say, I feel incredibly privileged and kind of humbled to be able to, you know, do this as a job. Actually, it's a huge privilege, and I enjoy every moment. And I think it's really, for me, about a kind of curiosity, I would say. I mean, I'm just fascinated by everything that goes on behind the scenes of cities. You know, why do things look the way they are? Why are buildings a certain height? Why are they made of a certain material? Why are they a certain distance from each other? All of these questions that seem obvious, or you take them for granted, but actually when you dig a bit beneath the surface, there's a whole web of relationships, histories, regulations that sit behind that. So I think I just have sort of incessant curiosity, and I'm never full up of information, you know. I'm always reading and listening to weird stuff in dark corners of the internet, which means that my head is a bit all over the place, but it keeps things really interesting. And I think in terms of then how to translate those ideas into action, I really focus on looking for leaders, actually, like people who, and these could be anywhere, right? I'm not talking about prime ministers or kind of mayors or something, not at all. Leaders in organizations, leaders in communities, leaders in companies, who can trigger change, who can catalyze things. I think there's a lot of power in individuals who have big ideas and big energy to kind of change things. So it's really, I think, quite fruitful to kind of identify these people and connect to them and facilitate them also if they're not having the kind of platform that they deserve.
Yeah, that's a great thought to end on. One question would have been, what are those thought leaders and models that you're inspired by? So you even touched on this, and I really like that you mentioned inclusiveness and also the point of how do we free people up so that they actually feel safe, and affording the time to design this with you at Space&Matter, or in San Diego at the Design Lab, or wherever our audience that's listening, if you're involved in one such project. How do you can you give people access to become part of these projects? Wow, our time is up. Every time I talk to you, I learn so much, and I do get inspired, and in a deep and in a calm way, which I really appreciate. So it makes me hopeful for the future, especially with the projects that you have realized. So it's not just thought leaders, but it's also doing leaders. People have done. So if you look at Space and Matter, the Ceuvel and Het Schoonship, those projects were realized. I put them on my map. There's something I can cycle to tomorrow, something I can experience, something where I can touch the soil, something where I can actually strike up a conversation because it's outdoors and it's safe and it has a human face to it. Thank you, Alice, very much.
Yeah, exactly.
The chat is up. This will be posted and everyone can watch it. And yeah, thank you. Now I wave.
Cool, thanks very much. Great to talk. Yeah, take care.
Everyone, thank you. Have a wonderful night and start into the day.